Have you ever stopped to consider what kind of impact uncontrolled mass immigration has on the environment? Or what happens to all of the farmland that has to be paved over to make way for millions of people every single year? You can't get that farmland back. You can't get forests back that have to be completely bulldozed over to make way for sprawling subdivisions. Let me just give you a statistic to better clear up what I'm talking about here. Every day, Canada is losing over 300 acres of farmland. Remember, that land is never coming back, and only about 7% of Canada's land is even arable. So yes, this is a major crisis, and mass immigration is to blame. But who is behind this? Our Save the Planet Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is the man responsible for bringing in millions of people a year into this country. Millions more than previous prime ministers. So to make the case that someone who is responsible for this rapid growth in population is also an environmentalist doesn't seem to jive with the facts, does it? Well, our next guest is someone who has been consistently laying out the environmentalist's case against mass immigration. And that is what we intend to explore right now. Well, joining us now on the show is a commentator, conservationist, and outspoken critic of mass immigration, as well as the president for Canadians for a Sustainable Society, John Meyer. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, John, why don't we just begin by having you lay out the case, lay out the environmentalist's case against mass immigration. It's not something that I don't think the Canadian audience gets to hear very much.
Well, basically, I mean, if you're going to achieve sustainability on this planet, we have to stop consumption. We have to stop consumption growth. And there are two ways of doing that, two necessary ways. One, we have to use less stuff. We have to use less energy, and we can't have any more people using the same amount of stuff we have now. So we have to reduce the load on the planet. Canada is a very energy intensive, resource intensive country in which to live. It's extreme climate, the distances are extreme, and de facto we will end up using more energy than someone who lives in Guadalajara, Mexico. We have to have better built, better insulated houses. They have to have heating, and we have to get our food, a fair amount of our food from afar. It's just, unfortunately, very energy intensive, and this has all been made possible by the immense reserves of fossil fuels we've exploited over the last century, a couple of centuries, but oil in particular since the 1950s has really driven the ability of us to go anywhere, do anything. That world is coming to an end for two reasons. One is the availability of oil. It's going to become more expensive as the reserves become less rich. And the other is the climate issue, where effectively we're setting the planet off into an area that it hasn't been before in human existence over the last 3 million years. So bringing people into Canada, both for Canadian rates of emissions and for global rates, is a disaster, because the carbon emissions of the immigrant stream to Canada quadruples when they arrive in Canada. So bad loss for the planet, loss for Canada. And it's just, it makes no environmental sense. And and it makes no social sense either. I think you'll find immigration policy has managed to evade any social, economic, and environmental impact studies. That's so it's a policy that needs to be reviewed.
Well, I find it all interesting because Trudeau, of course, has touted himself as a major environmentalist. He's very proud of the work that he's done on trying to save the climate. But of course, he has also been in charge during this rapid mass immigration experiment into our country. So I feel like the two just don't really mix, do they?
They don't, but you know what Trudeau says is about as relevant as what Donald Trump says. I mean, virtually everything comes out of their mouths. But it is interesting that Donald Trump, Mr. Climate change is a Chinese plot, actually outperformed his America for 3 years, actually outperformed Canada in terms of carbon emissions. Our carbon emissions grew more rapidly under Trudeau than Mr. Trump's did in his term of office. Now, there's reasons for that, but Trudeau, like Canada, has never kept. Unfortunately, Canada has never kept its word on any climate agreement. We were of the Kyoto signees. I think there were 58 nations which signed on to that. Canada was the worst. Second worst performer. So we were number 57. Instead of having our emissions go down by 6%, they went up by 19%. And that's two reasons. One was the oil sands, which everybody knows about, the big bad oil sands, and they are dirty. But adding, I think it was 6 or 7 million people over the period of the Kyoto Accord time frame, that contributed more in emissions than the oil sands did.
One stat that I heard, John, which was really alarming when I was doing some research on this show and for other projects, was that Canada is losing over 300 acres of farmland a day due to primarily this massive growth in our population. Am I right about that? Because that just seems unbelievable.
Yeah, it is unbelievable, but it's I believe that is the figure, and it's been increasing. I mean, anyone who's traveled outside of any of our major metropolitan areas knows that. But there's also the other factor: the smaller centers, the small towns, who pride themselves on being small and being a viable community. They are surrounded by farmland and forest, and these areas around those small centers are just being built up. You don't have to have kilometer after kilometer of subdivision to realize that you're losing a lot of farmland, and whether it's southern Ontario, central Ontario, where the loss is mostly forest, or out on the prairie. We're losing farmland all over the place, and it's not just the big centers. It's most apparent there, but it's not just the big centers.
When you were bringing up, the Kyoto protocols and Canada's climate commitments and targets, I don't want to put you in a political box, but it does sound to be it seems to be more of a liberal argument you're making. My question for you, John, is where is the left on this issue? If they actually care about the climate the same way that it appears you do, why does the left not seem to want to address immigration at all?
Well, please don't call me a liberal. I mean, I've been called everything else, but I've never really qualified as a liberal. I like to think that I understand what's going on, and I
Right.
deal in real physical units. And I don't like to put political blocks on any particular position. I mean, we're looking for better numbers, and we're not getting better numbers. We aren't telling the whole story. We aren't going through all the impacts of the things we're doing, whether it's the oil sands or population growth. I mean, the Century Initiative wants to triple our population, and that's what we're on track to do. That's what we've been on track for the last 30 years to do, triple our population. There's no public support for that. And, it doesn't, I don't think even liberals support that. I think I think Canadians are 5 or 6 to 1 against tripling our population. And so you're cutting across all kinds of political spectrums. So we need good numbers, we need accountable government, and we need a democratic system that works. And we don't have that at the moment, I'm very sorry to say.
Right. No, I would completely agree. I was going to bring up the Century Initiative. It's something we've talked about on this show before. Is the Century Initiative behind this? Are they a major lobbying force? Is this also part of what developers want? Who do you think is behind what we're seeing here and the loss of our prime agricultural land, obviously through such massive growth?
Oh, the fix has been in for 50 years. The people who wanted this to happen, banks, developers, etc. I mean, effectively, we lost control of our media corporations. They knew this was going to be unpopular. Uh, Canadians have never wanted, since the 50s, they haven't wanted more people in the country, and immigration has pumped it up by about 13 million, I think. And so it's been a slow process of gaining control and gaining control of the narrative, where growth is everything. Growth is a benefit. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about Toronto. We're talking about Canada, be a big nation, be an important nation. And left out of all this is any kind of value placed on the people: per capita income, equality, affordable housing, quality of life, access to nature, any of these things. That never gets discussed. And it's because these people have taken control. They're the biggest donors to politicians. They have controlling interest in the media. And it's although the media tends to be corporate media tends to be growth oriented, because the advertising revenue
Right.
from big things like houses and cars vastly exceeds Bob's kitchen renovation kind of sources. So, but anyway, it's been a very conscious policy and a highly rigged policy.
Going back to the Century Initiative, I saw that you wrote a letter to MPs who were invited to a Century Initiative event, asking them to reconsider their participation. Did you get anywhere with those letters? Do MPs ever reach out to you?
I sent that letter actually not to MPs. It was to one official from a city in Nova Scotia.
I see.
I have not received their reply. I will be following up. I also sent that virtually exact same letter to Ontario Nature, who should be standing up for nature, and they had published an op-ed basically saying, don't blame immigrants for all these various impacts. And we're not blaming immigrants, we're blaming a very corrupt immigration system. And the response from them, I just got it this morning, was we don't have space to accommodate a rebuttal. But we are now going to be putting on our website this letter so that it can be downloaded, modified to the individual's taste, and sent to their MPs. And anybody, if anyone cares to do that, please send us copies of the MPs' responses. And MPs or your mayor or MPP, whatever,
Right.
please send us copies of the responses, and we'll see what is being said. But I suspect there won't be responses because I don't think they can absorb that message that growth won't solve all problems.
It seems like you're laying out the case that the Canadian leadership at both the provincial, federal, and at a media level have sold out the people for corporations.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I mean, they've created this juggernaut where mentioning immigration is effectively death. If you're a political party and you mention that we should cut back on immigration for whatever reason, I think A, you'll be attacked, maybe you'll be attacked, but B, you'll disappear off the pages. You won't be covered. And you were asking me about political orientation. I mean,
Right.
I guess I would put myself down as I've always been green. I would put myself down as a techno-populist. I think we should have all of these means of determining welfare of the country, welfare of the people, our goals, and they should be oriented, on the welfare of people, and it had damn well better be green.
Right. And so I'm guessing then, John, your optimism that a change in federal government will result in a change on immigration policy that will be more geared towards conserving our country is not high.
No, well, if you look at the people, I mean, I talk with all kinds of biophysicists and naturalists and this kind of thing, and climatologists, and no one sees a way out of this. You've probably read the latest climate, where it's now becoming officially able to discuss that they're predicting most climatologists are putting the target where we will end up at 2.5 to 3.5 degrees. That's lethal. And so everybody's sort of throwing their hands up in the air, but in terms of politically, there's just no savior on the horizon. The People's Party, Max Bernier, he's the only one talking specifically about it, and great for him. You know, he's got the guts to do it, but his environmental policies would make me throw up. However, I would vote for him if I thought he had a chance of getting elected, because the cutting back on population growth is the number one thing you can do to help this country at the moment, on all levels. But the Green Party is a dead lost cause. I just resigned a couple of weeks ago. So anyway.
You've written about this concept that aging is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just what happens in countries and communities, and that the solution, of course, is not to just keep importing people to solve that problem. Explain that a little bit more, because that's the argument that we are fed by people in charge, that we have to solve our demographic problem, and the only way we can do it is through immigration. You argue that that's not the solution. Why?
Well, I thought this argument was over earlier in this century when Jason Kenney's paper came out and basically said, report to him said, aging, immigration won't solve aging, but there's no need to solve aging because it's inevitable. The population demographic transition started in the 1700s. People started to have fewer kids, and they started to live longer. And so now it's happening that where populations are starting to stabilize, and that means inherently that the percentage of old people is going to be higher. That's a permanent case. If you want to keep the demographic profile of the 1950s going on into the future, you're going to have to grow at an increasingly rapid rate forever. And nobody's proposing that. I mean, you can say, oh, we won't have that problem if we keep up with mass immigration and we get to 100 million. Well, at 100 million, you will have that problem if you try and stabilize. You're going to have to go to 700 million in another couple of hundred years. So it just doesn't work. And there are a lot of benefits to aging. First of all, old guys like me, we don't use up as many resources. We've got the infrastructure. We don't have to buy new stuff. We don't have our egos as much attached to the cars we drive or whatever. We just energy demand, resource demand is going to go down, and also the value of young people is going to increase because there are going to be fewer of them. So they will be more valuable. Their wage rates are going to go up. We're going to invest to get their productivity up. So, and housing is going to become more affordable. Plus, no society is a society is far less likely to squander its young men in a war, particularly a foreign war, if they are such a valuable commodity as they will be in an aging society.
So do you think that there's any justification to use data like GDP to justify whether or not a country is doing well? It's something you've written about, that everybody who's involved in this growth agenda always fixates on GDP. You have an economics background. Why do you say that that's just not worth considering, or not worth using as a barometer?
The GDP is a great system. It outlines the makeup and the size of the commercial economy. It was created to be the basis for an equitable tax system in an increasingly complex economy. And the people who created it said it should never be used as a measure of welfare. It should not be used as a measure, as a tool to define national policies. But in fact, it has become that because the money economy has sort of overridden the real economy, and the money economy loves inflation. It loves cash flow, and people are accumulating immense wealth without producing it, holding up GDP as their banner. But it's a completely false god. It's not. It's a cash flow. For any accountants out there or any business owners, it is not an accounting system. It is simply cash flow.
Right. Do you think the solution to this can come from politics? Do you think politicians will eventually come around to this if there's enough public support behind it? Or do you think that the solution needs to simply just be besides politics? It needs to be involved with local communities pushing back and kind of organizing at a ground level?
Well, I've been to 2 meetings locally here in Western Nova Scotia, Southern Nova Scotia, and one was liberal and one was grassroots populist. Same theme. The people that showed up, same theme, and you could hardly believe it was a liberal meeting. It's all the same complaint, and everybody sees the same problem, but it just hasn't translated to a leader who's going to stand up and say, we have to change, we have to do this and this. The Century Initiative, the people they represent, the control that they have in the media, these people are very good at what they do, and they're not going to give up their cash cow. They know how to control things. They know the terms. They know the means, and they've got their politicians lined up. I don't know what's going to happen. Mind you, Trump happened, and who would have thought that someone like Trump could ever become president of the United States? But it happened, and that was riding on the anger of a huge proportion of the society.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that the work you're doing and the kind of voice that you're adding to this conversation is extremely important. John, where can our audience find your work, and where can they connect with Canadians for a Sustainable Society?
Well, the website is sustainablesociety.com. I've written a couple of books. The Renewable Energy Transition, Realities for Canada and the World, and second one is a little bit more arcane. But basically, the website is the place to go, and we need to. I think it's got a lot of good information that people can use to bolster their arguments. We've broken it down so that people can use it, pick it apart, and use it on all kinds of different topics, and hopefully they will, and start talking to their politicians and demand that the politicians talk back to them.
Absolutely. And a link to Canadians for a Sustainable Society you can find in the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble. Mr. John Meyer, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks. It's been a pleasure.